Very good. It's very tough on and he was talking about Kashering of knives. He says, before you kash them, you have to clean them off and rub them down with something to sharpen the knives. While to take off all the rust, before you kash them. Okay, so the Mechaber says here, halacha, which it comes also that you have to take off the rust. Why do you have to take the rust off of a kli before you kash it? Because there's two reasons given. There's two reasons given. The Aruch says that it's because of the chatzitza. The kli had to bleed. There's now something between the kli and the hagala water, so you're not going to be able to get the bleeds out. Okay. The Aruch says that this comes from a pasuk coming in maybe next week's parsha, that the pasuk by hagala came from ach es hazor v'es hakesef, which shows a kashrus, and ach is a meaning that has to be the kli itself. Don't have anything else, just the kli itself. It teaches you that you should not have anything rust on top of it. Okay, now the Aruch says that it comes from a sifri. In fact, it's not in the sifri that we have. Okay, if you look in the sifri that we have, it doesn't say it there. So whatever it is, that's what the Aruch says, and everybody else quotes it from the Aruch. Wherever he brought it from, that's what he says. Okay, we'll see the significance of that in a second. The Taz brings the same sifri. He's quoting the Aruch, but he has a different shot in it. He says the reason is not because of a chatzitza. The reason why now you can't have rust is because it's possible that under the rust there's some food. So you can only kasher a kli if you kasher the kli, but the end you can't kasher the end. So he says, therefore, if there's food underneath, it might be food trapped underneath it, and therefore you're not going to do it with kasher. Okay, the Pri Megadim says, what's the difference between these two answers? Is what would happen if I rubbed the kli down, there was no rust left on it, and then it rusted over afterwards before I ever used it. So is it possible that food got trapped under there? No, because I know that it rusted without any food coming. I took this knife and I cleaned it off. It's perfectly clean, and then it gets, without anybody ever using it, it gets rusty. So the Taz says there's food. It can't be food under there. No one's used this knife. But according to the Aruch, it's chatzitza. Then it's the same kind of a problem. So there's a problem that there's a chatzitza. Okay, that's what he says in Afternoon. The Taz says himself that what happens if it's not rust, like a bulky piece of rust, just a discoloration in the kli, like you have in an oven. He says that's not a problem. From his perspective, he's saying because there can't be any food trapped under there. It's just a discoloration in the kli. It's not something that food could be trapped under.
That's normal procedure. That's normal.
That's normal. And the Tatas, he says, if it would be that you have to get off of discoloration, he said there wouldn't be one kli that we can kasher. He says it doesn't exist. Like such a kli, it doesn't have a discoloration. But he means there shouldn't be something bulging on top of it. Now, you could think that according to the Aruch, it would still be us, even the discoloration, because the Taz is afraid there's going to be food under there. Obviously, discoloration can't have food under it. But you might think that the Aruch holds that if there's a discoloration, it's still a chatzitza. But in fact, the fact that the Pri Megadim has to give the example, he has to get enough community between them, is the case where you rubbed it off and then again the whole thing. When the Taz himself says straight out his din that if it's a discoloration you can kasher, why do people say it? And here's the obvious not community to the Aruch, because he holds that even according to the Aruch, a discoloration is not a chatzitza either. Just like using the word chatzitza in a person, when a person wants to be toivel, they want to wash their hands, have a chatzitza. If your hand is stained with a color, that's not a chatzitza. It's only if there's something on your hand, not if there's something in your hand. Okay. The Mishabura brings just the Taz's reason, that the reason is because of there might be food trapped underneath there, and he also mentions the Taz is nafkamina, that if there's a discoloration, it's not a problem. Okay, now let's go. In a minute, we're not going to read it yet, but the Ramah is going to say in a second that if you have a problem of be'en left on your food, he's talking about with these little holes in the kli, and you're afraid there might be food trapped into there, you can put a coal onto it, and the coal will burn everything away. The way we say is that libun kal gets rid of small amounts of be'en that are left.
Would that be enough to kasher?
So, as far as the kashrus, so
it won't be enough.
We're talking about to get rid of the band. Okay, whether it works for kashrus is a separate question. So we're talking about getting rid of the band. So the Ramah says that yes, you can get rid of the band with this coal. So the Pri Megadim asks, he wants to know, what about for the problem that this band underneath the rust? We said that the Ramah was talking about that this band like right on the kli, stuck into the edges of the kli. You can put a coal on it and it'll burn it away. What happens about this thing that there's rust covering over, considering there's food underneath it? Will the coal burn it away? Because here the coal doesn't have direct contact with the food. It's only through the rust. So will it have? So he says he doesn't know what it should be. He says the minig is the people make of that. The minig is the people assume that if you put a coal onto it, it burns away all the be'en, even if it's under the rust. And the Mishabura just brings it like that. He doesn't bring this even a shaila. He says, yeah, you could do it. He has no problem. In fact, there seems to be a raya from a din later on in Halacha Yud Gimel. He talks about a ply. If you have a patch put on top of a kli, and the shaila is if and how you can kasher the kli if there's a patch on it. You use the kli once for treif or for chametz, and then at some point later they put a patch onto it, and now you want to kasher the kli. So the Mishnah Berurah there says you have the same concerns as over here. First of all, food might be underneath the patch. And second is the patch is going to be a separation, a chatzitza, between the hagala water and the kli. It's the same kind of concerns over there. And there, what does the Mishnah Berurah say? The Mishnah Berurah says, well, if the reason is because it's a chatzitza, putting a coal on it's not going to help. But if the reason is because, if the chashash is that there might be food underneath it, then you can put a coal onto it, it'll burn up the food also. And the Mishnah Berurah says it, and it sort of says in the Shulchan Aruch, almost says in the Shulchan Aruch. So you have a right from that case over there, that this works, that even though there's something separating, the coal is going to do the trick of burning up what's underneath it. Okay, now, a practical application of this, which is really a question, which is, a retort is huge cylinders, okay, they're huge, into which you put canned foods. The cans go into a basket. Put 100 cans in a basket, roll them into this huge shell, you seal it up, and then you cook it, usually with steam, inside of this big shell. Okay? So a retort, in many cases, is made out of steel. It has to be very strong to handle all the steam that's going on in there. Yeah, well, usually the inside of a retort is completely covered with rust. The entire thing is covered with rust. So when they're steel, they're covered with rust. So are you allowed to they get kasher. So how are you allowed to kasher it? It's really a question. How can you kasher if the thing is coated with rust, completely, 100% covered with rust? So it's a question. It could be that the answer is that the Dr. Moshe over here says that if you have a kli that has rust on it on the outside of the kli, I mean, not the inside where the food goes, on the outside of the kli, or on the very rim, like the rim of the kli, you don't have to worry about the rust. And he doesn't explain why. You don't have to worry about the rust. So
there's no blia inside.
Why is there no blia inside?
How can there be blia inside?
Because, tell me why. Because what?
The way it's sealed and everything.
Because it's sealed in the retort or in the Ramos case? Which the Dr. Moshe was
let's say the retort. In the retort is that sealed?
The cans are sealed in there.
Yeah.
Right. So, but we say that blias go out of the kli through the water into the retort. It doesn't have direct contact with the food. But what you mean, I think what you mean is, what I thought the Dr. Moshe means. What is Dr. Moshe? Why, if there's rust on the outside of the kli, don't we have to worry about it? Yeah. So I figured the reason is because you can't get food trapped in there. It's on the outside of the kli. I mean, occasionally food goes there, but it's very far-fetched that food should have dropped over there exactly at the time that the rust was going on. Usually, the way the rust is on the inside of the kli, so the rust the food can get stuck under there. But if on the outside, how often does that happen? Well, that's the reason for the Dr. Moshe. That's the reason why you don't have to worry about the rust on the outside of the kli. Because food doesn't usually get there. That's exactly what goes on in a retort. Even though it's the inside of the kli, but food never touches the inside of the retort. There's blias in it, but there's no food. So we're being concerned that food got trapped under there. So as far as the retort is concerned, the inside of the retort is like the outside of the kli. It's a place that never has contact with food. So therefore, even though there's rust, the Dr. Moshe, it's from a maril, says you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about that kind of rust. You can catch it even though that rust is there. Okay. So now, I'm going to digress for a second. As follows. This din that says that there's a problem, if there's rust on the kli, you can't catch it. So, Rabbi Shach has a question. Rabbi Shach says, and I'll give you something out from him about that in a second. He says, I don't understand. He says, there's a kli that has rust on it. He says, how much of the kli is covered with rust? So I just told you retort is 100% covered with rust. But people don't use pots that are all covered up. There's a little bit of rust over here. There's a little piece that has over there. He says, how much be'en or blia could be behind there? He says, isn't there a din that if a kli that's also l'shtamush b'shefa, you can use it without kashrus? So what are we worried about? So there's a little spot that's not getting kashrus. So how much blia or be'en could be stuck behind that thing? How much could it be? So there's a little bit there. So why did you have to get rid of that rust? So the din is, if you have a kli that's also shamash b'shefa, it has a tiny blia in one spot, and the blias are always bottom, then you don't have to kashrus. So over here also, there's a tiny blia. There's a certain spot, maybe there's a blia there. So who cares? Why is that a problem? So he says, you see from here, this is one proof, and I'm going to say the other proof in a second. He says, you see from here that there's a rule that even though the din says there are cases that you don't have to kasher, you don't have to kasher, like also the shtam shefa. There's a preference to kasher. Even so, you're supposed, as if it's a nice thing, you're supposed to do this thing, you're supposed to kasher anyhow, even though min hadin, technically, you might not have to kasher. Okay, that's what he wants to say, and I'll tell you the other right in a second. Okay, now, so I just want to talk about that idea for a second. First of all, you have to understand, this is coming from a pasuk. The Rosh says it comes from a Sifri. Well, how could a pasuk be a mila and a preference? How could it be that the pasuk is saying you have to get rid of the Rosh? Doesn't mean you really have to. It means it's a nice thing to do it. It says achas azov means only have the kli, don't have anything else. So that's a preference. The Torah doesn't usually do. It's either mutar or not. It's a nice idea to do the thing. Maybe we'll have an answer to that in a second. But another question is that this thing that Rabbi Shefter is saying, that it's maybe just like a mila, but it's not a requirement, is in fact a sheet in the Rishonim. Okay? There's only one problem, is that sheet is not halacha. What's the sheet in the Rishonim? On this din that the Mechaber says that you have to get rust off, to my knowledge, doesn't say it in the Gemara. He brings it from a Rosh. The Torah says that the Rosh said you have to remove all the rust from a kli based on this Sifri that he says. Okay? Now the Beis Yosef says, but you should just know, the Shibbolei Haleket holds that you don't have to for Pesach.
You don't have to what?
You don't have to remove rust for Pesach. That's what the Beis Yosef says, but we don't pass it like him. Yeah. What does the Shibbolei Haleket say? He doesn't bring it. What does the Shibbolei Haleket say? The Shibbolei Haleket says that first he says you don't have to remove rust from a kli before you kasher it, and he says for Rabbeinu Shlomo Zatzal, Rashi, he's a Talmud of Rashi, Shibbolei Haleket, because Rashi held that you have to remove rust when you buy a kli from a goy. Because the pasuk says achas azov esakesef. That pasuk is something like clay midyan. They got kelim from midyan. It's about to say you have to toivel kelim from a guy. You have to toivel it. You also have to get rid of the rust. Also, before you kasher the kli, you have to get rid of the rust. You can only kasher the kli by itself without anything on it. That's only for goyim. When you buy a kli from a guy, that's what you have to do. If you make a kli tray for yourself, or you have a chametz stick of kli, you don't have to kasher it. You don't have to get rid of the rust. Okay, that's what the Shibbolei Haleket holds. That pasuk that says that.
He's not worried about
right. So what does it mean? He holds that there's no such chasash. Let's say, like Rabbi Shefter says, because the little bit that's there is going to be bubble. How much bleed could there be in this thing? And he says the pasuk that's telling us is not saying a regular didn't have hakolos kelim, because for hakolos kelim you don't have to do it. If you make a kli tray yourself, or you buy it, you have it for Pesach, you don't have to do that. Only it's a matter for goy. When you buy it from a goy, you have to do it. Just like if you buy a kli from a goy, you have to do tefillah scale. It's like a nice thing you have to do to the kli. I don't even do it nice. I mean, it's like a responsibility to do this thing for the kli. But it has nothing to do with making it kosher. If you use a kli without toiveling it, doesn't make your food treif. But it's so he is saying that there's a mile in certain cases to do it. Okay, well, guess what? That's what Rabbi Shefter is saying. Okay, there's only one problem. The problem is that we don't pass like the Shibbolei Haleket. The Beis Yosef is saying is the Rosh says you always have to remove rust. The Shibbolei Haleket says no, you only have to in certain cases. Brings from Rashi only in certain cases when you buy it from a guy, then you have to. But otherwise you don't have to remove the rust. So we paskin not like this. There's such an idea that maybe the pasuk is just a special chiddush by special cases, but usually you don't have to do it. And we're paskin not like that. So here we found sort of a makar to what Rabbi Shefter said. But that's exactly the person who says that is what we don't pass like. So we could maybe compromise and say that really everybody agrees to the Shibbolei Haleket that min hadin you don't have to remove it. It's because of like Rabbi Shefter as far as you don't have to really remove it. Shibbolei Haleket says he holds that the pasuk is just for the case when you get it from a guy. That's the case when you have to do it. And everybody else holds the pasuk is for all cases. But even so, it's only a chumrah. It's only like a special preference. It's not really that you have to do. Okay? But it's very this Shibbolei Haleket, in my mind, makes things worse for Rabbi Shefter rather than better. It seems to say exactly what he's saying as a shita that we don't pass like, where Rabbi Shefter is saying that we do pass like this thing. Another thing, Rabbi Shefter has another ayah. His other ayah is from an Ar Sameach. We talked about this the other day. From Ar Sameach, the Ar Sameach says, he says, I have a question. He says, if you hold Tam Ki'ik Lav D'Oraisa, with that Minat Torah, Believers don't make things treif. He says, why do you have to kasher things? Why does the Torah say you have to kasher them? How do you have to kasher it? What's the believers can't make the food treif. Now the Gemara really says chiddush. The Gemara says if you hold time to Gilad D'Oraisa, Hagos Kelim is a chiddush. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, we kasher because the believers that come out have to be they're going to make my food treif. So I got to get rid of those believers before I use my kli. But if you hold the blias can't make my food treif min Torah, so why does the Torah say the kasha? So the what's it called? The Aruch says, really it's a Gemara. The Aruch says it means is that the Torah is telling you that even though those blias can't make your food treif, you still are supposed to get rid of them anyhow. Which is also so. Rabbi Shach says, what does that mean? I mean, it has nothing to do with.
And what's this Torah?
It's not. It's a chiddush. It's a chiddush of course. You have to do it. You have to get rid of it. He has possibilities what the svara might be for it, but it's the Torah just telling you to get rid of it. But it's like a mila. It's not that if I don't get rid of it, I'm going to make my food treif. It's not that kind of a reason. It's you just it's a good thing to get rid of it. Now the Aruch is saying it according to Manyomar Tam Ke'ik Lav Deraisa. That's what he's saying it. He's explaining that shita, which we don't pass like. We pass in Tam Ke'ik Deraisa.
Yeah.
So Rabbi Shechter wants to say that thing that the Aruch says is even true L'man Yomar Tam Ke'ik Deraisa. Once we see it in Tam Ke'ik Lav Deraisa, he tries to extend it to even those who hold Tam Ke'ik Deraisa hold. There's still an element of that you have to cash things even if there's no minatid, you don't have to. Because it can't shape up your food, you still have to do it anyhow. Which of course is a tremendous chiddush. And there are other questions on what Rabbi Shechter said. So you'll see, I'm going to give you something afterwards. You'll see what he says. You'll see some questions on it. That's for the side. Okay, but we got. So this sheet of Rabbi Shechter has questions on it. Okay, but it's not just Rabbi Shechter's full issue. We'll see Rabbi Belsky has his own way of questions. We'll get to that in a second. I want to pause for a second. Shibboleth, like it said, you don't have to get rid of the rust because he didn't say why. Because he said that pasuk doesn't mean for Pesach. So that we have a question. We can accept what the Shibboleth is saying, the understanding of what he's saying. You don't have to get rid of it because the little blia won't tape up my food. But that's fine for the whole year round. But what about Pesach? The Beis Yosef says he's even talking about Pesach. Let's say I don't have the kashrus, but on Pesach, if I use the pot on Pesach, chametz is also b'mashu. So for all the year round, I could say, you don't worry about those little pieces of rust, because they won't shape up your food anyhow. It's a tiny bit. But on Pesach, that tiny bit is enough to shape up my food. So if there's a piece of a kernel of wheat sitting underneath there, then on Pesach, it's going to make my food chametz. So it's very nice to say that from the rules of Haggalos Kalim, I don't have to do anything, but from Hilchos Pesach, I have to do something. So Minat Torah, I don't have to, because Isser Mashu is only D'Rabbanan. But now that we have the Isser Mashu, Midrabbanan, eat chametz is also b'mashu. So how can I leave the food there when it's going to basically make my food safe on Pesach? So it's not because of the Haggalos Kalim, it's just because I want to eat my food. What am I going to do with my pot? As soon as I cook up food, it's going to make a problem.
So
you say. So I don't know what the answer is. Maybe the answer is that the chashash that this food under there is only a suffix. We don't know that this food. It's only maybe. Chametz is only also b'mashu is only D'Rabbanan. So maybe it's a suffix D'Rabbanan l'kula. Maybe to be choshesh that this food under there. When even if it would be there, it would only make things only also D'Rabbanan. Maybe I don't know. This is like a side question which we may have an answer to in a second. It's a side question on this. How can the Shibboleth Leka doesn't say, if I remember, specifically for Pesach. Maybe he's in Hilchos Pesach. The Beis Yosef says he means even on Pesach. So I just didn't understand it. You could tell me from the rules of Haggalos Kalim I don't have to do it. But how are they going to let me use the pot? The pot still has the chametz in there. So very nice that I got a.
Well, we're not sure if it has chametz.
Right. Right. So maybe that's the answer. It's only a suffix. It's only a suffix. So you're allowed to and the mashu is only midrabbanan. Maybe you don't have to chosh. Okay. Now let's go to a different case. Now we're to Rabbi Belsky. The answer to the following question: you have a deep fryer. Okay, a deep fryer, a commercial deep fryer it's a big container of oil, and on the bottom you have these oil tubes that have the heat goes through them, and that cooks up the oil, and into it the food either you put it in or it goes on a belt through it, however it works. But those coils on the bottom, when you want to kasher a deep fry, it's easy. The hagol is easy. You fill it up with water and you boil it. It's the cleaning that's a nightmare, because they change the oil once a year in these things. They sit there forever. The junk is caked on like anything, and it's a real mess to clean it up. And they said, fine, we'll clean it. The question was like this. Those coils on the bottom had hardened oil on them that had, the word is polymerized. They turned mountains into black rocks over there that you need like a chisel to get these things off. So the question was, they could get rid of all of them. They broke the clay apart, they were going to scrub it down and do what they could. But it was like almost impossible to get this black stuff off. And the child was, do they have to get it off or not? So,
could you please go to Reverend Eaton's office?
Is it really going into the? Is there any contact? What's it heating? It's heating what?
that coil, let's say this is the coil. This is the coil.
Yeah, I'm trying.
This coil is sitting in a big container of oil. Right?
Oh, it's inside.
In the oil. The oil, it runs right through the middle of the deep fryer, sitting in the oil, through which your French fries or whatever are going through the same oil.
That's right.
So the question was, should we have to remove that? So most people who would look at this would say, well, that's exactly how it's in. You have to get rust. So it's not rust. It's a carbon buildup. Whatever it is, you have to get those things up before you catch them. That's what we would have thought. So Ravalsky says, no, you don't have to take it off. He says, look, why do you get rid of rust? We have two reasons. Either because there's be'en underneath it, or because it's not going to let you kasher. He says, well, for the be'en that's underneath it, he says, come on. Any food that's left underneath there is Aruch. It's not food anymore. He says, look at the stuff. The stuff is so hard you have to knock it off with a chisel. He says, any food that's underneath there is for sure not food anymore. He says, and about the blias? He says, well, the blias are ein v'yoma, and a tiny amount of blias anyhow, so it'll be asur l'shtamish b'shefa. Any possible blias that are in there will be bottled into the food. So, and therefore you don't have to kasher. And in fact, Rabbi Schwartz, when we were talking about this the other day, he said, how can there be food underneath the rust? He says, you think that food is worth anything? I mean, do you think that food is edible anymore? So, this is all very nice. Along the lines of Irving Bel's saying, that's all very nice. Those are all good svaras. But what happens to our din? What is we have a din we just read that says you have to get the rust off. Well, what's the case of the Shulchan talking about? You think he's talking about that there's rust over the whole kli? That's not the normal case. Who's using a kli that's covered with rust? It means that there's a certain amount on it. Yet he says you have to take it off. And guess what? You have a good question. Why isn't it bottled? And why shouldn't it say it's not edible? And so, to which the answer is, there's a pasuk. The pasuk says you have to get it off. And along the lines of what the Shibboleth Halakha said, which is that there's no sense, it may not make so much sense logically you have to get it off, but that's it, the pasuk is telling you have to. So, I don't know how to answer his questions, because he's saying a good point. There's a rule, a din called asur l'shtamish b'shefa. It's a din you're there that if it's a kli, that the bli is so little, that it's always bottled, you don't have to kasher it. Well, how can we reconcile that din with our din of the rust? The simple thing by the rust is that the blias there's just a certain amount of rust. So isn't it automatic? There's always going to be a tiny amount. So doesn't this din say opposite of that din of asur l'shtamish b'shefa? And I don't know what the answer is. I don't have an answer to that question. But why, if we have a touring course, which one we should do? You have the deep fryer in front of you. So the logic says you wouldn't have to get it off. But the din says, the halacha that we just read says, you got to get the rust off. So I don't know which one is right. I don't know how to answer the theory, but shouldn't you think that you should have to get the stuff off? So I don't really have a good answer to that. I don't really have a good answer to what he's saying. But again, not because I think it's wrong. Everything that he's saying is logical and makes sense that it should be true. Like, do you really think there's food trapped underneath that's still edible? No, it doesn't. But do you think there's really food, like Rabbi Schwartz said, do you think there's really food trapped underneath the rust that's edible either? What's the difference? So I don't really know so we're left with a question, really. Rabbi Belsky and Rabbi Shefter are both saying that logically you don't have to get it out. Rabbi Belsky saying therefore it's mutter. Rabbi Shefter saying it's mutter, but it's a preference to get the stuff off. Yet our din seems to be saying not like that. It seems to be saying you have to get it off. So it's hard to understand. It's not going to have an answer. So we're left sort of with a question as to what's going on there. Okay, let's finish off the din. Hilkach, back to the Shulchan Aruch. Hilkach. Therefore, since we said that there might be a little food trapped underneath it, Hilkach im yesh boy gumois, if there's little holes in the kli, the eino yochol an akos yafon, you can't clean it that well. Eino moyeloi hagola, it doesn't work to do hagola for the kli because that food might be left in it. And what does it say in the parentheses? Pirish. What is the word hagola? And maybe this is the first time that we've used the word hagola. What is the word hagola? Haflata. Spitting something out. Shahakalim polkim ha'isser. Hagola means that the kli spits out the isser. Shebehem, it spits out the isser, as opposed to libun, which means that it burns the isser, destroys it. Hagola means it draws it out of the kli. V'hu meloshin, it's from the same as in a pasuk. This is a pasuk. I looked it up. It's a pasuk in Eov that it says shoyroi ibar v'lo Yaakov. Eov is is questioning. He says, how come the Rishonim have it so good? Literally, this is the word that uses in the few sukkah before. He says that how come his ox or his bull impregnates a cow, Shara Ibar, and the zera doesn't get spit out. doesn't get spit out. No, then the cow becomes pregnant, and then the next words in Pasuk is, and then it carries it to term. It doesn't miscarry. How come the Russia has it so good? He doesn't have any problems in what he does. That's he's saying. So the word Hagala or Yagil means to spit out. Okay. So you have to do libun in the place where the holes are to burn up any ban, which means it doesn't mean libun gomer. It means it's with a coal, burn up any little ban. So the Rama says, okay. The Rama says v'hanadin shel sakinim, and the block into which you stick knives. Okay, it means some people have I think this is what it means. You have a knife, a rack, and you stick the knife into it. So what happens is that you call a rack has a lot of little holes in it where the knives go in, and you can't get your hands into there. So food's going to get stuck into there. There's no way to save it by kashering it by Hagala. You can't put a sock into on Pesach because it might pick up some food that's in there and make your food sick. Okay, now the Mishbur over here brings a whole bunch of things that can go wrong with kashering knives. This whole halacha had been about knives. He had a whole bunch of things that are wrong with it, which are, and a lot of his problems have to do with the way the handle is attached to the knife. Okay, so I brought some knives from upstairs just to demonstrate what that means. Which is like in this knife, the handle is screwed on, basically screwed onto the blade. So the Mishbur says when you do that, first of all, food can get stuck by the screws. Now over here, these screws don't have tracks in them. This is
what you see here.
Right. But so that's only, in this case, you don't have that by the screws. But over here, along the edges where the blade touches the knife, and over here, all these kind of contact points, there's place for food to get stuck. So somebody once showed me, Rabbi Haffer once showed me, a way to know whether there's a possibility of food getting stuck. If you take the handle in one hand and the blade in the other hand, okay, and you bend the knife, okay, you bend the knife like this, you'll see that there's a crack opens up over here between the blade and the handle. You can do it on both sides. As opposed to, if you take it in this, when you push this open, you see a crack opens up like that. If you take a knife like this, where the handle is one solid piece, it's not screwed on, it's one solid piece. As much as you bend, you're not going to get a hole into there because there is no space. It's a perfect seal on this thing. So this kind of a knife you can kasher. This kind of a knife you can't kasher because of the concern that there's the end over there, unless you burn it. Okay. Then Mishra also says other things. Also, you can't catch it if your handle can't handle the Hagala. We don't have that. All our handles can handle the Hagala. If you have a handle that was too delicate, or glue that couldn't handle it, you couldn't do it either. Okay. We have a similar case to the handles of this, which is the handles on a pot. And nowadays, the way you make handles on a pot, you screw them on, and those screws loosen up. And Memelo, you have to make sure that that's clean, or remove the handle before you do it to clean it, before you catch it. Okay, the Mishbur just sticks in one last thing. The Mishbur sticks in that he said that you can't clean the blocks that you stick the knives into, that you can't clean it because the holes are hard to. If it's possible to unscrew it and break the whole thing apart, then obviously you can catch it. Okay, then you can't. You can if you can break it open.
Sure.
If you have this block with the knife stick into, and you can unscrew it, the Mishbur says good. Okay, so fine. If you could unscrew it, no problem. The problem here is just usually you can't get your hands into it if you can catch it. Okay, there are other parts to this then about how clean the kli has to be before you kasher it, how you get rid of these little pieces, etc., and especially the famous rule of Keder Chamatim. In Mirza Hashem, we're going to leave that for Halacha Yud Ches, where it talks about a different angle of this whole shiloh. Okay.